Can you hear me? Where'd you go? Hello? Looks like it's working. Sound? Hello? Yep. Chapter 2, Skewing the Cards. Always before, she had thought of this time of year, the spring, as her favorite, a time of renewal, a reaffirming life itself. But this year, like the last few, brought with it a springtime that Lady Constance Pemblebury, of the court of Ursal dreaded, for King Danube, the man she so adored and the father of her 2 sons, was leaving again, as he did every spring, loading up his royal boat and sailing down the Mesure de Laval to the city of Palmares, and that woman, Baroness Jepsen Winden. The very thought of her brought bile into Constance Pemblebury's throat. On many levels, she could respect the heroic woman. Had their situations been different, Constance could imagine the 2 of them as friends. But now there was one little impediment. Danube loved Jepsen. He wasn't even secretive about that anymore. In the last couple of years, he had often proclaimed his love for the woman to Duke Callis, his closest friend, a trusted advisor, along with Constance, and the leader of his all-heart brigade. To his credit, King Danube had tried to spare Constance's feelings as much as possible, never mentioning Jepsen's in Constance's presence. Unless, of course, Constance happened to bring up the matter, as she had that morning, pleading with Danube to remain in Ursal this summer, practically throwing herself at his feet and wrapping her arms around his ankles in desperation. She reminded him that Merwick, their oldest son, would begin his formal schooling in letters and etiquette this summer, and that Torrance, a year younger than his brother, at 10, would serve to squire for an all-heart night. Wouldn't King Danube desire to be present at Merwick's important ceremony? After all, the boy is in line to inherit the throne after Danube's younger brother, Prince Mortalis, a vanguard, and who knew what might befall Mortalis in that northern wild region. So of course King Danube would want to personally oversee the training of one as important as Merwick. Constance had reasoned. But Danube had flatly denied her request, and though he had tried to be gentle, his words had struck Constance as coldly as the timberland's late winter rain. He would not stay, would not be denied his time with the woman he so loved. It hurt Constance that Danube would go to Jepsen. It hurt her that he no longer shared her bed, even in the cold nights of early winter, when he knew that he would not see the Baroness of Palmares for many months to come. And Constance found it humorous that even when he was in Jepsen's presence, Danube was not sharing her bed. What was even more troubling to her was that Jepsen was still of childbearing age, and any offspring of Danube's union with her would surely put Merwick back further in the line of succession. Perhaps Jepsen would go so far as to force King Danube to oust Merwick and Torrance altogether from the royal line. All those thoughts played uncomfortably in Constance's mind as she looked out from the northern balcony of Castle Ursal to the docks of the Mesure de Laval and the king's own ship, River Palace. Duke Brotherford's pennant was flying high atop the mast this day, a clear signal that the ship would sail with the next high tide. That pennant seemed to slap Constance's face with every wind-blown flap. A strong breeze, she thought. Breeze. To carry Danube swiftly to his love. You will not join King Danube on his summer respite? Came a strong voice behind her, shining her contemplation. She swung about and saw Targan Bree Callis, Duke of Westerhants, standing at the open door, one hand resting against the jamb, the other on his hip. Callis was her age, in his early 40s, but with his curly black hair, neatly trimmed goatee, and muscular physique, he could easily pass for a man 10 years younger. His eyes were as sharp as his tongue, and more used to glancing up at the sun and the moon than at a ceiling, and his complexion ruddy. He was perhaps Constance Pemblebury's best friend. Yet when she looked at him of late, it only seemed a reminder of the injustice of it all. For while Callis appeared even more regal and confident with each passing year, Constance would not ignore that her own hair was thinning and wrinkles now showed at the edges of her eyes and her lips. Morwick will begin his formal training this summer. Constance replied after she shook a moment to compose herself. I had hoped that the Duke of Westerhants would personally see to his initiation into the knightly ways. Callus shrugged and grinned knowingly. He had already discussed this matter at great length with King Danube, the two of them agreeing to Morwick would be tutored by thiz, one of Duke Callus's fine commanders, until he reached the ability level suitable for him to begin learning the ways of warfare, both horsed and afoot. Then Duke Callus would take over his supervision. Constance knew that too, and her tone alone betrayed to Callus her true sentiments, that he should not be going along with Danube when Danube was going to the arms of another woman. And as Constance's tone revealed that truth, so did Callus's grin revel his understanding of it. The Duke's constant amusement with her predicament bothered Constance more than a little. Constance scowled and sighed and turned back to the rail, and noted that Danube's ship was gliding away from the dock. While an escort of several warships waited out on the great river, surprised, the woman turned, noting only then that Duke Callus wasn't dressed for any sea voyage. Wasn't dressed for traveling at all. Danube told me that you were to go alone, she said. He was misinformed, the Duke answered casually. I have little desire to lay eyes upon Jepsen Winden ever again. Constance stared long and hard, digesting that. She knew that Callus had tried to bed Jepsen several years before the onset of the rosy plague even. But he had been summarily rebuffed. He did not approve of Danube's choice. He will make a queen of a peasant, Callus replied with a snort and without hesitation. No, I do not approve. Or are you jealous? Constance asked slyly, glad to be able to turn the tables on Callus for a bit. Do you fear Jepsen will not rebuff his approaches as she rebuffed your own? Duke Callus didn't even try to hide a sour look. King Danube will pursue her more vigorously this year, he stated knowingly, and I fear that she will dissuade his advances, insulting the king himself. And you fear more that she will not, Constance was quick to add. Queen Jepsen, Callus remarked dramatically. Indeed, that it is a notion to be feared. Constance turned away, looking back out over the great city and the distant river, chewing her lips, for even to hear that title spoken caused her great pain. There are many who would disagree with you, Danube, obviously among them, she said. There are many who consider her the hero of all the world, the one who defeated the demon Dactyl at Mount Ada, who defeated Father Abbot Markwort when he had fallen the evil, and who defeated the rosy plague itself. There are many who would argue that there is not another in the world more suited to be queen of Hans the Bear. And their arguments would not be without merit, Callus admitted. To the common people, Jepsen must indeed seem to be all of that and more. But such rabble do not appreciate the other attributes that any woman must, of necessity, bring to the throne. It is a matter of breeding and of culture, not of simple swordplay. Nor do such rabble appreciate the unfortunate and unavoidable baggage that Jepsen Winden will bring along with her to Ursal. He stopped abruptly, stalking over to stand on the railing beside Constance, obviously agitated to the point that Constance had little trouble discerning that he was jealous of Danube. Targan Breed Callus, the Duke of Westerhants, and the King's commander of the All-Heart Brigade, was not used to rejection, and though Jepsen's refusal had occurred a decade before, the wound remained and the scab was being picked at constantly by the knowledge that Danube might soon hold her in his arms. But there was something else. Constance knew something that was even deeper. When she took a moment to consider the situation, it was clear to see. Her baggage is her allegiance to the Avelican Church, a woman reasoned. She is a pawn of Abbot Brahmin Herd and all the other robe-wearing fools, Callus replied. Constance stared at him incredulously until he at last turned to regard her. After all these years, you still so hate the church? She asked, a question that went back to an event that had occurred more than 20 years before. Callus had been an upstart at the court of the young King Danube, often bedding Danube's wife, Queen Vivienne. When Queen Vivienne had succumbed to an illness, despite the efforts of Abbot Jehowith of St. Hans and his supposedly God-given healing gemstones, Callus had never forgiven Jehowith or the church for not saving his beloved Vivienne. You wear your hatred for the church more obviously than the plume of your all-heart helm, Constance remarked. Has Danube never discovered the source of your bitterness? Callus didn't look back at her. She stared out at the city for a long, long while, then gave a little chuckle and a helpless shrug. Had King Danube ever learned of Vivien's connection with Callis? When Danube, who had been busy betting every courtesan in Ursal, constant Pembleberry included even care? Never loved Vivien as he loves Jepsen, Constance remarked. He had been courting her so patiently for all these years, he will not even share my bed, nor those of any others. It is all for Jepsen now, only for Jepsen. Now Callis did turn his head to regard her, but the look he offered was not one that Constance could have expected. That is the way love is supposed to be, he admitted. Perhaps we were both wrong to show such scorn for our friend's choices. An epiphany, Duke Callis? Constance asked, and again Callis gave an honest shrug. If he loves her as you love him, then what is he to do? The Duke calmly asked. We share 2 children, Constance protested. Callis' laugh cut her to the bone. It was well known in Ursal that King Danube had fathered at least 2 other children. In Hans the Bear, in God's year 839, that was nothing exceptional, nothing even to be given a second thought. Now Callis wore the same slight grin that she had first seen on his face this day. It is the loss of your love that so pains you? He asked bluntly. The mental image you must carry of Jepsen in Danube's arms? Or is it something even greater? Is it the possibility of greater loss that Jepsen Winden will bring with her to Ursal? She is young, yet, and strong of body. Do you fear for Constance's heart or Merriwick's inheritance? Constance Pembleberry's lips grew very thin, and she narrowed her eyes to dart throwing slits. The word both screamed to in her mind. But she would not give Duke Callis the pleasure of hearing her say it aloud. The shake of his head and his soft chuckle, as he walked back into the palace, told her that she didn't have to. Duke Rutherford, a smallish man with salt and pepper hair and leathery skin that was cracked and ruddy from years at sea, stood on the deck of River Palace, staring at the back of his good friend Liege, King Danube, and grinning, but the king's posture was noticeably forward, with Danube leaning over the front rail. So eager he seemed, and Duke Rutherford could certainly respect that, though he, like so many other nobles of Danube's court, had grave reservations about the advisability of bringing a pleasant peasant into their circle to serve as queen. But Danube's posture was surely comical, though it pained Rutherford even to think such mockery of his beloved king. He took a deep breath and steadied himself, suppressing his mirth, and strode over to stand at the rail beside his king. Beyond to the north and west, the long dock of Palmyras was in plain sight. She will be there this year? Rutherford asked. King Danube nodded. I sent messengers ahead, the first to inform Jepsen that I would be journeying to Palmyras this summer, and would desire her companionship, and then the second, a week later, to confirm that she would indeed remain in the city. Confirm? Rutherford dared to ask, or to command her to do so. King Danube snapped his gaze the Duke's way, but he could not retain his scowl when she saw his short, bow-legged friend smile. I would not command her so, for what would be the gain? Other than to lay my gaze upon her, I mean, for this is ever a pleasure. But no, Jepsen assured my second courier that she would be in the residence this summer. Do you take that as a good sign that... Rutherford started to say, but he paused and cleared his throat, realizing that he might be overstepping his friendship with King Danube, that he was, in effect, asking the king about his intentions. If King Danube took any offense, he did not show it. He looked back out at the distant docks and the gray, fog-enshrouded city beyond. Jepsen had known such tragedy, he said, has known great loss and great love. I have sensed something blossoming between us, but it will not come swiftly. No, her hands were not yet healed when last I saw her. But when they are healed? Duke Rutherford asked. King Danube thought it was over for a moment, then shrugged. Then I will have an answer, I suspect, whatever that answer may be. A painful delay, the Duke remarked. Not so, said Danube. In most things, I am not a patient man, but for Jepsen, I will wait as long as she needs me to wait, even if that means that I will spend decades of summering in Palmyras, pace my throne room in Ursal throughout the dark of winter, just waiting for the weather to calm that I might go to her once again. Duke Rutherford hardly knew how to respond to that declamation, for understood without any doubt that King Danube was not lying, was not even exaggerating. The man had waited so long already, and despite a host of courtesans, particularly Constance Pembleberry, practically kneeling outside his bedchamber door, begging entrance, it did the Duke of Mirianich's heart good to see his king so devoted, so obviously in love. Somehow that fact elevated Rutherford's estimation of this man he already admired. Somehow, seeing this true and deep and good emotion in the King of Hans the Bear, the greatest man in all the world, and in Rutherford's estimation, the closest, along with the Father Albert of the Abelican Church, to God, ennobled Rutherford and affirmed his belief in things greater than this physical world. Danube's love for Jepsen seemed to him a pure thing, a higher truth than the mere physical lust that so permeated the streets of her soul. Still, she was a peasant. It will be a fine summer, King Danube remarked, as much as to himself as to Rutherford, or to anyone else. And surely the king's smile was one of sincerity. "Greetings, Lady Pembleberry," Abbot Shuden Owan cried with the exuberance of one obviously nervous when he saw Constance striding across the nave of the great chapel of St. Hans. The impish man had a tremendous lisp, one that made greetings sound more like greetings. "All is in place for Prince Torrance's acceptance of the Evergreen. I assure you last week. Nothing has changed for the ill, I pray. Oh no, not that. I pray, for it will be better to be done with the ceremony now, in the spring, before the inevitable host of weddings begin. Of course your needs would supersede. I have not come here to discuss the ceremony at all," Constance interrupted, holding her hands up in a pleading gesture for the man to calm down. She knew that if she let Owan go on, she would likely spend the better part of an hour listening to his rambling. The man thought himself a great orator. Constance considered him the most complete idiot she had ever met. His rise to the position of Abbot of St. Hans only confirmed for her that Duke Callus's disparaging attitude towards the Belgian Church was not without merit. True. St. Hans had been in a great fix those years before, when Abbot Hengist and several others masters had all died on the road to the distant wild Barbican, victims of a goblin raid on their journey to partake of the Covenant of Avalon. Old Owan was the highest ranking of the remaining masters, and true, the man had been much more tolerable in his younger days, sometimes seeming even introspective, than after his ascension to the highest position. As confirmation that everyone in the world wanted to hear his every thought spoken again and again. Still, despite the circumstances that had brought him to the position, it seemed to Constance that the church should have some way of removing him, especially since many of the younger brothers of St. Hans had blossomed into fine young masters. "Nigger!" "Good night." Constance dismissed both their thoughts and her current disdain for Abbot Owan, reminding herself that it was in her best interest to keep this man, this easily manipulated fool, in a position of power. She looked at him as he stood there with his head tilted to one side, his tongue constantly licking, maybe the front door, instead of being retarded. She looked at him as he stood there with his head tilted to one side, his tongue constantly licking his thin lips, his dull eyes staring at her, and she offered a warm smile, the source of which, in truth, was the fact that at that moment, Abbot Owan looked very much to her like one of Duke Callus's less than brilliant hunting dogs. "I expect that you will soon preside over a great wedding ceremony at St. Hans," she said calmly. "King Danube?" Abbot Owan dared to whisper, and Constance nodded. "O Lady Pembleberry," the abbot cried, and he fell over her, wrapping her in a great hug. At last he had come to see the value of the mother of his children. At last our great king will assume the proper role as father to his princely sons. "The ceremony will not include me," Constance scolded, pushing Owan's back to arm's length, and then she started to add, "You fool," but managed to bite it back. King Danube had sailed north to Palmaris. "Official business," Owan replied. "Yes, of course, we were informed. Lust and nothing more fills the sails of River Palace." Constance explained, "He has gone north to be beside Giuseppe Winden, the Baroness of Palmaris, the savior of—" "Spare me your foolishness," Constance sharply interrupted. "Giuseppe Winden has done great good in her life, I do not doubt, but you do not know her as I know her. Abbot Owan, if she does become the next Queen of Hans the Bear, then you can expect great changes in the structure of Ursal, particularly within St. Hans. She has no power in the Belgian Church," Owan argued, "no title at all." "No title, but do not underestimate her power," said Constance, "and do not doubt that she will use that power to reshape St. Hans as she has done St. Precious in Palmaris." "Then is Abbot Brahman's province," said Owan. "Brahman, who owes his position to his relationship with Giuseppe Winden and nothing more," Constance pointed out, and there was some truth to her point. In the days of Father Abbot Markwort, Brahman had been a minor brother at St. Mirabel, the great mother abbey of the Belgian Church, because they don't deserve their lives. In the ensuing split of the church, Brahman had thrown his hand fully with Jepsen and Elbrian, and with the cause of Alvin de Brie, this new martyr whose actions in defeating the demon Dactyl, and that after he had been declared a heretic by Markwort, had sent tremendous ripples throughout the church. Brahman's side had prevailed in that conflict, and the young monk had been rewarded with a position of power far beyond any that he could possibly have otherwise achieved. Had he toiled another decade and more at St. Mirabel. Do not misunderstand me, Constance went on. Jepsen Wyndon will prove a fine queen for King Anew, and will serve the people of Hans the Bear well. It is very generous of you, Abbot Owen remarked, but she is not of noble breeding and has no knowledge of what it means to be a queen, let alone what it means to be a queen mother. There she has said it, straight out, the blank look on Owen's face, his jaw dropping, his eyes unblinking, told her that he had caught her point completely. I have heard rumors that she was damaged, Constance remarked. In her battle with Father Abbot Markwort on the field of north of Palmaris, Owen replied, for that tale was common knowledge. When she lost her child, yes, I have heard much the same rumor. See what more you can learn, I pray, Constance asked. Is Jepsen barren? You fear for Merwick and Torrance, the abbot said. I fear for Hans the Bear, Constance corrected. It is one thing to have a pleasant peasant queen, who can easily be controlled by a skilled court and king. It is quite another to have that peasant queen bringing children, heirs, into the picture. Their blood and breeding will never suffice to assume the role that destiny puts in their path. Do you not remember the terrors of King Archibald the Red? Remember how the king just never has done a good job? That they've never done a good fucking work in their life? Because I haven't heard them get their job done ever in all of history. She finished dramatically, referring to a tyrant who had ruled in Hans the Bear in the 6th century, born of a peasant queen with a bitterness towards those of higher station. Taking the cue from his mother, Archibald had tried to invert the entire social structure of the kingdom, seizing land from noblemen to give to peasants and filling his court with uncouth farmers, all with disastrous consequences. The nobility had turned against Archibald, resulting in a 5-year civil war that had left the kingdom broken and devastated. Abbot Owen knew that history well. Constance could see from the horrified look on his face. It would be better for all if Merwick remained in the line of succession. Do you not agree? She asked bluntly. Indeed, my lady, Abbot Owen said with a bow. I will inquire of St. Mirabel and St. Precious to see what I might learn of Jepsen's condition. The better for us all if her battle against Father Abbot Markwort left permanent scars, Constance said with a coldness that made Owen shiver. The woman turned to her heel and strode out of the chapel, leaving a very shaken Abbot Owen behind. Because Jesus is a nigger, does not deserve love, hates others. Oh yeah, that's me that hates that.